The locket was cold in my palm. That was the first thing I noticed. Not the weight of it, not the tarnish along the clasp, but the cold. Like it had been sitting somewhere dark and still for a very long time, waiting for the exact temperature of my hand to wake it up. My grandmother had pressed it into my fingers 3 hours before she died, and she hadn't said a word. Just looked at me with those steady brown eyes of hers. The kind of eyes that have seen 100 years of foolishness and chose patience over every single one. And closed my fingers around it. I kept it sealed. I don't know why. Maybe because opening it felt like admitting she was gone. That was 14 months ago. Tonight, something changed. Tonight, at a dinner table full of people who shared my blood and almost none of my grief, I heard my cousin Derek say my grandmother's name the way you'd say the name of something that no longer mattered. Casual, dismissive. A comma in a sentence about money. And I felt the locket shift in my pocket, like it had been waiting for exactly this. Let me tell you how I got to that table, and let me tell you what was folded inside. My grandmother's name was Loretta May Caldwell. She was born in 1938 in a house that no longer stands on a road that was renamed twice to erase the people who built it. She raised 4 children, buried 1 husband, outlasted 2 recessions, and kept a garden that neighbors 2 streets over could smell in July. Tomatoes, collard greens, sweet basil, and 1 rose bush that she claimed came from a cutting her own grandmother brought north during the migration. That rose bush was still blooming the morning she passed. I noticed that. I don't think anyone else did. I am her youngest grandchild on her daughter's side. My name is Simone. I am 34 years old, and for most of my adult life, I have been the quiet one. The one who showed up. The one who drove Grandma Loretta to her cardiology appointments at 7 in the morning and sat in the waiting room reading 3-year-old magazines without complaint. The one who fixed her porch light and resealed her windows before winter and learned, one slow Sunday afternoon, how to change a furnace filter because she asked me to and I didn't want her breathing cold air in February. My cousins knew how to show up at Easter. They knew how to fill a room with noise and laughter and the smell of somebody else's good cooking. They were not unkind people, exactly. But they were people who understood value in very particular terms. Terms involving visibility, volume, and inheritance. Grandma Loretta had a house, a real one, 3 bedrooms, a finished basement, a detached garage, and a corner lot in a neighborhood that developers had recently decided to notice. Property values had doubled in 4 years. Everyone in the family knew this. No one talked about it directly, the way you don't talk directly about a large animal that has wandered into the room. When she died, they started talking. The first family meeting was held 2 weeks after the funeral at my Aunt Patricia's house. I sat at the end of the table and listened. Derek, who was Patricia's oldest son and had recently gotten into real estate, did most of the talking. He had a yellow legal pad and a confident pen. He talked about the property. He used words like liquidate and market timing and equitable distribution. He said, "Grandma would have wanted us to be smart about this." I held the locket under the table and said nothing. There was a second meeting, then a third. Each one had slightly fewer questions and slightly more assumptions. The assumption gathering weight fastest was the one that said Grandma Loretta had died without a formal will, that the house would pass through intestate succession, split among her surviving children and their lines, processed quickly before any complications arose. My Aunt Patricia was her only surviving child. That made Patricia the primary heir under this assumption, and Patricia had made clear, gently but with precision, that she intended to sell. Derek would handle the transaction. The proceeds would be divided. My share, as a grandchild, would be a small fraction of a fraction. No one asked me how I felt about the house. No one asked me about the rose bush. What they didn't know, what I had not yet said out loud to anyone, was that Grandma Loretta had told me things, not in the way of grand announcements or formal declarations, in the way of old women who have learned that the surest way to protect something is to say it quietly to the right person at the right moment. One Sunday, maybe 2 years before she died, we were sitting on her porch after church. She was shelling butter beans into a metal bowl, and the sound of that, the soft snap and the hollow ping against the bowl, is something I will carry in my body until I am buried. She looked out at the yard for a long moment, and then she said, almost to herself, "Simone, I took care of everything, the way my daddy taught me, quiet and legal and right." I didn't ask her what she meant. I knew better than to push Grandma Loretta. She told you things when she decided you were ready. 3 weeks later, she had a small stroke. She recovered most of herself, but something shifted. She became more careful with her words, more deliberate. After that, she started giving things away. Not frantically, not like someone panicking, like someone curating. The good china went to my cousin Deja. The quilt her mother made went to Patricia. The Bible went to the church. And one morning in late October, she called me into her bedroom, lifted the locket from the small cedar box on her nightstand, and gave it to me without a word. That locket became the thing the family teased me about. Gently at first, then less gently as the months passed and the property conversations intensified. "Simone got the jewelry," Derek said once at a family dinner, with a little smile that he probably thought was charming. Patricia laughed. Someone said, "Well, at least it's something." Someone else said Grandma always did have a soft spot for quiet people. Said it the way you'd say quiet people need more help. I let it roll. I had learned that from Grandma Loretta, too. You don't spend your energy defending yourself to people who have already decided what you're worth. You save that energy for when it matters. The fourth family meeting was held on a Thursday evening in January, at the office of a property management firm Derek had connections with. It was the kind of office that smelled like new carpet and ambition. There was a whiteboard with numbers on it. There were printouts. Derek was wearing a jacket he hadn't owned 6 months ago. This was the meeting where they were going to formalize the decision to list the house. I drove there in my grandmother's car, which Patricia had asked me to keep running while the estate was being sorted out. I drove past the house on the way. The porch light was on because I had replaced the bulb last week. The rose bush was bare in January, just brown canes and the memory of red, but the roots were deep. I had looked it up once. A well-established rosebush can live over 100 years if the soil is right and someone pays attention. I walked into that office with the locket around my neck and a manila envelope under my arm. 3 days before that meeting, something had happened. I had finally opened the locket. I want to tell you what moved me to do it, because it wasn't dramatic. I wasn't alone at midnight with a candle. I was at my kitchen table on a Monday morning drinking coffee that had gone lukewarm, and I was looking at a letter from the estate attorney's office, a generic notice about the intestate proceedings, and I felt something close and suffocating move through my chest. The feeling you get when a story is being written about your life and no one has thought to ask you for your version. I reached up and unclasped the locket. The front held what I expected, a small photograph, worn soft at the edges. Grandma Loretta as a young woman, maybe 20, 22. Standing in front of a house. Straight-backed, chin up, one hand at her side and the other resting on a porch railing, wearing a dress with white collar. Unsmiling, but not unhappy. The expression of someone who understands the weight of the moment and is choosing to hold it with dignity. The house in the photograph was her house, the one they wanted to sell. I looked at that photograph for a long time. Then I noticed that the back of the locket didn't sit flush the way it should. There was a tiny ridge along one side, barely a millimeter. I pressed it with my thumbnail and felt a give. It opened again. A hidden compartment, smaller than a fingernail, built into the back. Folded inside, pressed so thin it was nearly translucent from years of compression, was a piece of paper. Not a note, not a letter, a document. Handwritten, and then stamped, and then signed in 3 places in a hand I would know anywhere. Loretta May Caldwell. I unfolded it at my kitchen table with the lukewarm coffee and the morning light coming in flat and cold through the window. And I read it twice, then a third time, because the human mind does not always accept immediately what the eyes are showing it. It was a property deed. Dated 1971. Executed and filed in the name of Loretta May Caldwell, sole owner, for the house and lot at the address I had driven past every week for my entire life. Her name alone, her signature alone, filed with the county recorder's office, stamped and registered. And at the bottom, in her careful cursive, a handwritten amendment dated 11 years ago, 2013, transferring full ownership upon her death to one beneficiary. My name, Simone Renee Caldwell. I sat very still for a long time. Outside, a car passed. A dog barked twice and went quiet. The refrigerator made its low, indifferent hum. She had not died without a plan. She had died with the most careful plan I had ever seen. The kind of plan that trusts one person completely enough to fold it smaller than a thumbnail and place it where only that person would find it. In the thing she gave them on the last afternoon, she had full use of her voice. She knew I would keep it. She knew I wouldn't open it until I was ready. And she knew, I think, that I would be ready when the room got loud enough to threaten what she'd built. I thought about the way she said it on that porch. Quiet and legal and right. Yes, ma'am, all 3. That Thursday evening, I walked into the office that smelled like new carpet and let the meeting begin without interruption. I let Derek stand at the whiteboard and go through his numbers. I let Patricia nod with the measured satisfaction of someone confirming what they already believed. I let the conversation about listing price and timeline and the splitting of proceeds reach its natural crescendo, the moment where someone asks if everyone is in agreement and hands hover over papers. Before we sign anything, I said, I need to share something. The room didn't go quiet immediately. Derek's pen kept moving for a half second. Then it stopped. I opened the manila envelope and I set the deed on the table. The copy I'd had made at the county recorder's office, because the original was already with the estate attorney I had called on Tuesday morning, a woman named Claudette Harris who practiced out of a small office downtown, and who, when I read her the document over the phone, was silent for 4 seconds and then said very carefully, Miss Caldwell, do not sign anything or speak to anyone about this property until we have met in person. I had done exactly that. The copy on the table was clear. The name was clear. The date was clear. Patricia picked it up. I watched her read it. I watched the color shift in her face. Not anger first, but something more complicated. Something that looked almost like recognition. Like some part of her had always suspected that her mother was not the simple woman everyone had agreed to believe she was. Derek took the copy from Patricia's hands and read it standing up, like reading it on his feet might change what it said. His jaw moved without producing words. The man from the property management firm looked at his own hands. This can't be, Derek started. It's filed with the county recorder. I kept my voice level, Grandma Loretta level. I have the confirmation number. My attorney has the original. You had an attorney? Patricia's voice was strange, thin in a way I hadn't heard from her before. I do now. I folded my hands on the table. Her name is Claudette Harris. She'll be reaching out to the estate office this week. The meeting ended shortly after that. There was no shouting. I had not come there for theater. There was a long, dense silence, and the scraping of chairs and the sound of Derek's confident pen rolling off the edge of the table and hitting the floor. He did not pick it up. In the weeks that followed, there were phone calls. There were 2 more meetings, these ones with attorneys on both sides. Patricia hired someone who spent 3 weeks looking for grounds to contest, for errors in the filing, for anything that might crack the document open. There were none. Grandma Loretta had been meticulous. The deed was valid, the transfer was valid, the notarization was proper. 52 years of ownership and 11 years of deliberate planning, all held quiet in a locket that people had smiled at because it wasn't money. It was better than money. It was land. Claudette Harris, in our second meeting, said something I wrote down in the small notebook I carry. She said, "Your grandmother understood something a lot of people don't, that real property, held correctly and passed correctly, is the longest-lasting form of wealth transfer available to a private individual. She wasn't leaving you a house. She was leaving you a foundation." I thought about that word. Foundation. The thing everything else stands on. The thing you don't see when you're looking at the walls. I also thought about what it had taken for Loretta May Caldwell to own that house in the first place. A black woman in 1971 in a city that had made that particular transaction as difficult as law and custom could manage. She had done it anyway. She had found the financing, navigated the resistance, signed her name, and paid every note on time for 30 years. Raised her children in those rooms. Kept that garden. Watched the neighborhood change around her, and held on, because she understood something visceral and true about what land means to a family that was once told it could own nothing. She passed that understanding to me the only way she knew for certain it would land. Not through announcement, not through paperwork handed over at a formal reading, but through a cold piece of gold pressed into my palm on a Tuesday afternoon in October, 3 hours before she left. Quiet and legal and right. I did not sell the house. I want to be plain about that, because some people, when they heard what happened, assumed the point of the story was the money. That I won because I got the asset and others didn't. But what I won was something the deed only partially captures. I spent 3 weeks in that house before I made any decisions. I slept in the room she slept in. I used the same kettle. I sat on the porch in February with a blanket across my legs and watched the bare rose bush and let myself grieve in a way I had not fully allowed since the night she died. I cried into my grandmother's pillow on a Thursday morning with no one watching and no performance required, and it was the most honest I had felt in over a year. I also found things. In the finished basement, in a filing cabinet she had owned since before I was born, I found 40 years of financial records. Every mortgage statement, every tax payment, every repair receipt. The woman kept records like she was expecting to be audited by history itself, and maybe she was. Maybe she understood that documentation is dignity, that every paper with her name on it was proof, in a world that had often moved to erase her, that she had been there, had built something, had held it. There was also a letter. Not the deed, a separate letter, written in her hand on her good stationery, dated 2 months before she died. It was addressed to me by name. It began, "Simone, if you are reading this, you opened the locket. I knew you would wait until you needed it. I have read that letter many times. I will not share all of it here. Some things are between a grandmother and her child, held close the way she held everything that mattered. But I will share this. She told me she had watched me for years. Not the way people watch someone to judge them, but the way you watch someone you're counting on. She said she had seen me show up quietly, consistently, without applause. And she said that kind of character was rare enough that she wanted to reward it with something real. She said the house was my inheritance, not because I was her favorite, but because she trusted me to carry what she had built forward, rather than convert it into something that could be spent and forgotten. She also wrote, "Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for receiving what was always yours. I gave it freely, with full mind and full heart. Stand in it. I have stood in it." Derek and I had one more conversation, about 4 months after everything was settled. He called on a Sunday evening, which surprised me. He was quieter than I was used to hearing him. He asked if I had plans for the house. I told him I was going to stay in it, that I was looking into repairing the garage and eventually maybe adding a unit to the basement as a rental. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Grandma knew what she was doing, huh?" Not a question. Something between an acknowledgement and an apology, which, from Derek, was probably the closest he would get to both. "She always did," I said, and that was true. She always had. There is something I think about when I sit on that porch now, in the early mornings before the neighborhood fully wakes up. I think about all the women who came before Loretta May Caldwell. The ones who held things for people who didn't acknowledge the holding. The ones who built quietly inside systems designed to exclude them. The ones who understood that the most powerful moves are often the ones that no one sees coming because no one was paying close enough attention to see them being made. She was that woman. She came from a line of those women. And she made sure, in the most precise and personal way she could manage, that I would be one too. The rosebush bloomed in April, full and red and extraordinary, the way it bloomed every year, whether anyone was watching or not. I was watching. I took a photograph of it with the porch and the front door behind it, the same angle as the photograph inside the locket, and I understood for the first time what she had been doing when that original picture was taken. She was documenting. She was saying, with a camera and her straight back and her chin up, "I was here. This is mine. Remember." I put the locket on the nightstand in her room. My room now. The cedar box it came from is still there too. I keep a few things in it: the letter, the photograph, a copy of the deed, and a cutting I took from the rosebush in early spring, pressed flat and dried. A deep brownish red that still holds, faintly, the smell of something alive. Every morning I open that box for just a moment before I start my day. Not out of ritual for its own sake, but because I want to remember what it felt like to hold that cold locket in the dark and not yet know what it carried. I want to remember that feeling. The weight of something whose value you can sense but haven't yet named. Because that is what she gave me, in the end. Not the house alone, not the deed alone, not the legal victory at a table with a whiteboard and a man whose confidence pen rolled across the floor. What she gave me was the proof that being steady and quiet and present and trusted is not a consolation prize. It is the whole inheritance. Everything else is the document that confirms what was already true. The locket was cold in my palm that Tuesday in October when she closed my fingers around it. Tonight, it sits in the cedar box on the nightstand in the house that has always been mine, and the metal has finally gone warm. She told me she took care of everything, quiet and legal and right, all three. She was not wrong. If this story reached something in you, if you know what it is to carry something quietly and wait for the moment it matters, share it tonight with someone who needs to hear it. There are people in your life holding lockets they haven't opened yet. Some of them just need to know the time is right. Subscribe so the next story finds you before the room gets too loud. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment purposes. All characters, names, events, and situations are entirely fictional. Any resemblance to real persons, living or deceased, is purely coincidental.